G'day and welcome back to the vlog slash rant for 2018, the first rant of 2018. What am I going to talk about today? Knock you down with a feather? I'm going to talk about regulations. Now I'm going to talk about crashes and incidents first, because there's been some pretty tragic events over the festive season. There have been 2 collisions between manned helicopters and manned aircraft, and that's produced some fatalities. One collision was in the UK, in Buckinghamshire in England, where lots of people unfortunately died when a helicopter and a fixed-wing aircraft collided just yesterday or the day before. Yeah, that's never a good thing. Never a good thing. And there was another crash in Spain, kind of miraculous. The one in Spain, it was a helicopter and a biplane collided, and believe it or not, the helicopter landed safely. The biplane pilot unfortunately was killed, but the helicopter landed. Look at the pictures of the damage to the rotors on this helicopter. Unbelievable. Now this was, I don't know the exact details of the crash. There's only a few sort of reports I've found online, but clearly this was really bad news, and lives were lost. Now, notice one word I haven't used yet in today's vlog, and that's the word drone, because there were no drones involved in this. Let's go back to earlier this year when a US military helicopter collided with a Phantom 4, and the tiny amount of damage that Phantom caused to the helicopter, which again also landed safely. Now, as I've said in these rants before, the single biggest risk to manned aviators is other manned aviators. I mean, that's in a period of just a couple of weeks or a week or so, we've had 2 collisions between helicopters and fixed-wing, manned helicopters, manned fixed-wing aircraft. During that period, there have been millions of drone flights, because a lot of people will have gotten drones for Christmas as presents. They'll have gone out and flown them. How many injuries or how many fatalities have been attributed to that activity of flying these drones, recreational drones? None. In fact, the only thing I read about was a guy in, where was it? Excuse me while I lift my glasses. A guy in Berry, on the New South Wales coast in Australia. Now, I'm having trouble with this. He was flying his model helicopter, apparently. It fell from the sky and struck him. He suffered facial injuries and limb fractures. My God, how big was that helicopter? I mean, maybe it must have been a 3D, one of those, things that 3D helicopters that you wouldn't get me in the same field as one of those. They are so dangerous. I think the guy that died in the USA, chopped his head off, he was also flying a 3D helicopter. Very big, very powerful. Sounds like this was very similar. In the report I read, New South Wales Ambulance Inspector Faye Stockman said he's absolutely fortunate. I think there must be a different definition for the word fortunate in Australia than there is in the rest of the world, because I don't call getting my face slashed ribbons and breaking limbs fortunate. But I think what she was saying was he could have been killed, and like the guy in America was killed. So forget about drones. RC helicopters, they are far more dangerous. I mean, drones, little tiny propellers, plastic. RC helicopters, 3D ones, massive carbon fibre props. We're talking kilowatts of power. Yeah, I think we really need to start looking at the risks as they exist. So yeah, it's like, that's a tragedy. That is terrible. But that's the risk that we face every day when we fly models like that. And only the operator of the model helicopter was badly injured. So, I guess he took that risk. He knew the risk he was taking, and unfortunately it didn't pan out for him. So, yeah, other aviation incidents or crashes over the holiday period here in New Zealand. We had a glider, lost half its wing, or lost a wing, 2 wings, lost one of them, spiraled down from a great height, and the people survived because they landed on a steep hill. It actually impacted on a steep hill, so the deceleration was relatively low. Both, I think there were 2 people in it. Well, I don't have the details, but the people in the glider survived with minor injuries. Whoa, talk about lucky. That's so, well, again, absolutely fortunate. But yeah, it shows you aviation is a dangerous thing. And there was a helicopter pilot who had an RV7, that's a RANS 7. He died, unfortunately, here in New Zealand. The aircraft was discovered in a paddock. It had obviously crashed, fatality. He was a highly respected pilot, many hours in flying helicopters, and so you think you'd know what he's doing. The aircraft itself, the RANs, are pretty reliable, a high-performance aircraft, but they're proven pretty robust aircraft, so we don't know what happened. It looks as if, and there were reports, that one of the wings separated in flight. I don't know. That was just a report. It's not confirmed. But again, structural damage, structural failure. So, yeah, if you lift yourself off the ground in an aircraft or a helicopter, you place your life at risk. If you fly a drone, no, you don't. Not to the same degree anyway. So What I'm getting to is I think things may change this year. Regulators can no longer ignore the facts. Now, the regulators out there have got to stop reading the Daily Mail. Stop reading the Daily Mail, which tells us every day that drones are going to bring down airliners, people are going to die. No, the Daily Mail are a bunch of clothheads who do clickbait people. They don't, you know, they're not journalists. They just write rubbish to get people to click on stories. The reality is that we've seen, again, and every year shows even more evidence that drones are super duper safe. Super duper safe. But the real risk is actually just manned aircraft itself. You know, if you're flying in a manned aircraft, you are obviously many, many millions of times more likely to be hit by another manned aircraft than by a drone. So let's get over it all, people. Let's you know, come on, let's wake up to the fact that we don't need a man with a red flag walking in front of our drones anymore. Drones are intrinsically very safe devices, both for the operators and for everyone else who may be nearby. Now, speaking of safety, how are we going to improve safety? Well, one of the things that they're doing here in New Zealand is they're trialling an app called an AirMaps app. And the idea is that you can go pull this map up on your smartphone. It knows where you are because it's got GPS, and it tells you if it's safe to fly or what restrictions there are. Well, I tried that here and it told me I couldn't fly. Now, I can quite legally fly here. And because I have a CA certification, I can fly at an airfield. But I could also fly down the park because I could fly what we call a shielded operation. So this AirMaps app is wrong. It's giving me bad information. And there's only one thing wrong than not having the right information. That's having bad information. So apps are going to be important in the future. We're going to see more and more reliance on apps. You know, already many of the airspace regulators are saying, well, you should go out there with your app and it'll tell you if it's safe to fly. But if it's not giving you accurate information, then it should be called a crap, not an app. Because, as I say, the only thing worse than no information is bad information. And if an app is going to be useful, it has to be 110% accurate. It must be absolutely up to date. It must be absolutely correct. For example, in the case of the incident with the Black Hawk helicopter and the Phantom in New York, there was a TFR in place. What's a TFR? It's a temporary flight restriction. It means aircraft were prohibited from flying in the area where the drone operated and where it hit the helicopter. So the guy flying the Phantom used his DJI app, which tells you if there's an airfield or whatever and says you can't fly here, that sort of thing, with the geo system, but it didn't have TFRs. So he apparently relied on that app to give him advice as to whether he could fly there or not. And unfortunately, the app was giving him incomplete information, so he carried on and flew. Yeah, he also flew beyond visual line of sight and broke 101 other rules, so she'd get his ass kicked. But the reality is that if he was relying on that app and it didn't tell him about the TFR, then he was relying on bad information. And if the regulators are going to say to us, you must use these apps, then they have to make sure those apps are 110% accurate and timely. Because if someone relies on an app with the advice of the regulator to determine if something's safe, if the app says, yeah, you're good to go, and then you have an incident because there was a TFR released just an hour earlier and you hit a helicopter, who's going to carry the blame? Should it be you? Because you were doing what the regulator said. You were using the app and the app said it's good to go. So are you really to blame? Well, of course you are, because bureaucrats never take responsibility for anything. So if the regulators want us to use these apps, we need an ironclad guarantee and indemnity that if we follow the app's information, we will not be held responsible for any incidents. Otherwise, throw your crap out the window. I'm not going to use a crap if it's just bloody full of useless, outdated, incorrect information. And AirMaps is just like that. It told me I couldn't fly when there are several ways I could have flown quite legally. That's it. So I'm not going to use AirMap. The CA Airways, who are the people who control the airspace here, they're telling us, oh, use this app. No, bugger you. I'm not going to, because it's going to lead people, it's going to give them a bum steer. And yes, it errs on the side of conservative safety. It says you can't fly when you can, but it's just as important that people are told when they can fly as when they can't fly. Because if people are constantly told you can't fly, you can't fly, you can't fly, then they're going to say, nah, I'm not going to bother with that. I'll just fly anyway. So it has to be accurate and timely. And sorry, AirMaps, it's crap. And speaking of drones and Christmas, guess what? I was watching Alan Yu's vlog, very good vlog, go and watch it. I really enjoy Alan's vlogs, they're excellent. And he apparently reported that DJI's servers were down over the Christmas, the festive season. Why? Well, before you can use your new Mavic or Spark or whatever else, a Phantom, you've got to register it. It must be able to connect to the internet through the smartphone app before you can fly it. So of course the smartphone app calls DJI servers to get all the registration information, exchange information, and of course I don't think DJI were quite ready for the fact that there were probably maybe 1 million or more people bought DJI drones, got them as presents, and suddenly the servers fell over and didn't work. So a lot of pissed off people who got their brand new expensive flash shiny state-of-the-art drone and couldn't fly it because they couldn't register it with DJI. That's a bit weak, isn't it? It's a bit of a shame. It's not very good. So maybe DJI will have learned from that, but a bad customer experience. Now I saw an interesting piece of footage was pointed out to me a couple of weeks ago, which seems to show a airliner cockpit being accelerated down a ramp by rockets and smacking into a phantom drone and the resulting damage to the windows of the airliner. There's been some questions as to the credibility of this footage because it does kind of look like something out of the 1960s, the jet-powered sledge, and the footage is kind of fuzzy, and I would expect if this had been done recently, it would be HD, that it would be sharp and it would be clear, but it's not. So I'm wondering, is this just a CGI mock-up or something? I don't know. Anyway, it shows this airliner cabin crashing into a Phantom 4 on one side, yet both windows get damaged. How does that work? And bits fly apart, but nothing seems to go into the cockpit. I don't know. I think it's just a red herring. Until it comes from an authenticated source, I'm not going to pay it too much attention. I think it's like the video of the Phantom hitting the wingtip of an airliner and breaking it off. Yeah, that was just CGI too. So be careful. Not everything you see on the internet is true, including this vlog. This could all be a lie. You don't know. I'd tell you though. Now, something a little worrying perhaps. When we think of model aircraft and drones and things, we think of the big brother, the regulatory authority is the FAA, and we think they're the people who have all the control over our hobby, but they're not. They're not the only people. In fact, they're probably not even the real problem. The FCC have a huge amount of control over what we do because radio-controlled model aircraft require the use of radio spectrum. We've got transmitters and receivers in the planes. If you run FPV, you've got a video transmitter and you've got a receiver on the ground. Telemetry, you have separate Mavlink telemetry channels. So we use a lot of radio frequency transmissions, and that's all controlled and restricted and regulated by the FCC in America. And so we've had a pretty good ride to date. I mean, I think most of the time people are flying illegally with FPV because I think the limit is about 10 milliwatts or something in some countries, and even the USA I think it's quite low, but everyone runs 200 milliwatt video transmitters, or at least 25 milliwatt for FPV, for drone racing, and maybe 600 milliwatts if you want to go a bit of distance, and that's generally, I don't think it's legal in most countries, but we do it because nobody cares, because in reality 5.8 gigahertz doesn't travel very far, so it's very unlikely you're going to interfere with other users of those frequencies. But when you go down a bit more to the 1.2 gigs, 1.3 gigs, that signal travels a lot further, and there's other problems. I noticed when I bought my first 1.2 gig FPV system from China many years ago that it would go right down to 1080 or 1.08 gigahertz, which was I think ADS-B frequency. No, I think it's a radar directional beacon. It's used by aviation anyway for navigation purposes. So you don't want to be operating your video signal on top of a navigation beacon because you will get in serious trouble, and it can cause really big problems with full-size aviation. So naturally, organisations like the FCC are not really impressed that you could buy this stuff. But of course, you're buying from China, there's nothing they can do about it. They can't inspect every package at the border and confiscate the stuff that might broadcast on an illegal channel. But some companies in the USA, of course, have been selling 1.2 gig video gear, and I think it was Get FPV, Lumiere, I think they've had a 1.2 system, and perfectly fine. I mean, there are two frequencies on the 1.2 gigs that if you're a ham you can legally use, well, pretty much legally use for FPV. But I think some of the gear they were selling also had the other channels enabled. So if you chose to, you could operate on frequencies that you were not supposed to use, and the FCC was a little bit upset by that. So they've pinged Get FPV with a massive fine, hundreds of thousands of dollars for being naughty boys. And so I gather that there are other vendors also being carefully looked at by the FCC with a view to doing something similar. They're trying to put the fear of God into people so that they don't sell this stuff. And you can understand it. I mean, fair enough. We don't want to be interfering with services that may be quite critical to safety. And so that's what happens. And we can't trust people not to use the frequencies that are illegal, and because look at 5.8 gigahertz for a start. So I guess the FCC is just doing its job. I think any hobby store or any supplier in the USA that sells stuff that is potentially illegal is taking a huge risk, because the FCC is a sleeping giant. It will sit around doing nothing, and then all of a sudden someone will spill their coffee and burn their lap. Oh, we better do something, I've woken up. And they'll get really snotty and they'll start pinging people like Get FPV and so forth. So, and it's only a matter of time. If they wake up and realise, oh, there's fines to be had here, they can whip around your local flying field and check out all your gear, make sure your radio control transmitter's got an FCC approval sticker on it, and that your video gear's on the right frequency and at the right power and everything. So as model flyers, we have to be vigilant. And this is all countries. In New Zealand here, I know that the Radio Spectrum Management Authority, the equivalent of the FCC, they have turned up at events and checked people's gear to make sure that it's all compliant. So make sure that you use compliant gear. Here in New Zealand, we're pretty lucky because I think we can use up to 200 milliwatts or maybe even 600 with analog 5.8 gig transmissions. Now, I usually use the minimum power level required. And we've also, you know, there's a particular part of the band you can't go beyond that. So all these 72 channel video transmitters, forget them. You're just going to get yourself into trouble. But having said that, as I said just a moment ago, 5.8 gigahertz, the higher frequencies are pretty good because they don't go far. The path loss is very high, and most of the stuff that's on 5.8 gigahertz will be for local area operations, you know, nearby stuff. Won't be for long distance, and it will also, if it's long distance, it'll have directional antennas, so it won't be looking at your model unless you fly right through the beam. So you're pretty safe with that. But nevertheless, bureaucrats are bureaucrats. If they think they can ping you for something and they had a bad day at home, they'll ping you. So be careful, be warned, be aware. And having said that, I got a wonderful product to review. It'll be coming up on the RC Model Reviews channel shortly. It's an FPV transmitter, and it's it is, again, as I said, some channels are legal, some are not. Some power levels are legal, some are not. And this is this transmitter will do the whole lot, right? It'll do a wide range of frequencies and power levels, and it has what it calls, I think, a restricted mode, which has got to be legally compliant with the regulations in many countries, right? So you can use the restricted mode, but they kind of say, you know, well, there's no fun in that, is there, eh? So what they've done is they've implemented a wild mode, which basically means you take responsibility for your own actions. So I'm going to be reviewing that. The instructions alone are worth looking at on that product, and it looks like a pretty good product. So stay tuned for that. It's nice to see a sense of humour, I suppose, in terms of products, and this is a product which has been created by someone with a sense of humour. I like that. So stay tuned. That'll be coming up on RC Model Reviews. But the whole frequency thing for FPV is actually going to push along a lot quicker the move to digital video, because digital video, you can use systems that, in fact, if you look at our regulations in New Zealand, we can only use this much power for analog transmissions on 5.8, but we can use way more power for digital. But the reason being that digital, we can use spread spectrum. So although we're using this much power, it's spread across such a wide bandwidth that it ends up being, you know, you take something this tall and that wide and squash it down, and it becomes much less tall but a lot wider. So that's what happens. You put the same amount of energy, but you spread it over the band, so it's not going to be as apparent on any individual frequency. So you can actually operate below the noise floor with digital transmissions. And the beauty of that is that it means you can have so many people, like 2.4 gig radio gear. I mean, we used to have a peg board and pegs because we had to choose the exact frequency we wanted to use, and nobody else could use it while we're using it, or a crash would ensue. With 2.4 gigs, whoa, who cares? If you look at the old long wire, it was the equivalent of a very tall, very narrow frequency. We put a lot of power out on a specific frequency, you know, 27 megahertz or 27225 or 72250 or whatever it was. Those very, very specific frequencies, just typically 5 kilohertz or 10 kilohertz wide, but a lot of power that gave us our control link. We went to 2.4, and now we have the same amount of power, but it is spread right across from 2.4 to 2.48 gigahertz. So it's spread across 85 megahertz. So we've taken that really tall column of energy and we've squashed it so flat that it hardly even registers. And that means that we can have many, many different signals all going on because the power levels are so low they don't interfere with each other. And because we have temporal separation as well, which basically means we're only using any one tiny frequency at an instant of time, the chances of people colliding are minimal. Anyway, the whole thing works really well. It's going to happen with video. It has to happen with video because analog is just too inefficient. Analog is just going to be too likely to interfere with other stuff. So we're going to see more and more digital video systems, which will be great because it means when we have out here at the field and you're flying FPV, you won't have to worry about Gordon plugging in and going, can you still see? And the inevitable, no Gordon, I've just crashed. But hey, this is the next step in digital video. some hurdles to be overcome here. I'll talk more about this on my RC Model Reviews channel. I'm going to do an analog versus digital comparison, and I'll talk about these features more, but we're going to see a shift to digital, and it's going to be driven as much by the need to avoid getting ourselves into trouble with the radio spectrum regulatory authorities as anything. There you go. Right, that's the end of my rant for today. It's raining. I should be ranting about the rain. A week of rain is predicted. It's supposed to be summer here. At least it's warm. But yeah, that's what happens sometimes in summer. We've got a storm brewing in the Tasman Sea. We're supposed to be 100-kilometre-an-hour winds and massive downpours in the next 2 days. So I won't be flying outside, but I will be flying inside because I have that cute little tiny whoop-type drone. I've already been flying it around the house. Brilliant fun. I love it. Go and watch the review of that on RC Model Reviews. That's it. Enough shilling for my other channel. That's it. So I wish you all a very good 2018. I hope you have as much fun as I plan to. And yeah, stay tuned. There'll be more fun, frivolity, rants, raves, moans, and all sorts of things coming up on the XJet channel this year. So thanks for watching. Bye for now.